We got football at 4 with Johnny Mack. The GM has a lot to do with the team, how they build it, and how they get it off the ground. And that is in the hands of one Howie Roseman for Thursday. And John McMullen has a 7-round mock draft right now at 97.3, ESPN.com. But he also will discuss a little bit about what's going on with the quarterback of the past and the quarterback of the present. John, what's going on?
Hey, how are you guys? I was also at that closeout.
Wow.
Andre Iguodala jumping on that game. I was actually covering the Sixers at the time, and they went to Game 7 against the Celtics in the second round. But I would disagree with this. The actual last exciting moment for that fan base was at the Constitution Center when they introduced Andrew Bynum.
That's right.
Good point.
The day, well, that and every lottery, ping pong ball extravaganza in the moments in the years after that.
Well, that too. But people were jacked up when they got Andrew Bynum.
Oh, yeah.
And if he would have played, I mean, if they got the Lakers Andrew Bynum, none of this would have ever happened because they would have won 50-plus games the next year.
Oh, I can agree with that. I could agree with you on that. That, if they – look, I applauded them for the Bynum trade because they took a swing. They might have missed, but they at least tried to jump outside of the box to do something other than stay on this. Like
Elton Brand was a part of that too.
Everybody's praising the Nets, but the Nets are on a collision course with being average.
Yeah, I think people kind of gloss over the Bynum thing because he was such a good player. And I think people forget he played every game, I think, the year before. He was suspended for a few games at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
But from a health standpoint, was completely healthy. And then he showed up here, and he just
physically
could never play again.
He was healthy physically.
Well, yeah.
He was a piece of work.
But he wasn't healthy physically.
Well,
my point is he played the entire season.
The year before.
And then he got here, and he was physically shot. It was the weirdest thing ever.
I want to play for the listeners a quote from one Donovan McNabb. He was on CBS Sports with Zach Gelb, had this to say when asked about Carson Wentz. I saw a tweet from you, which I agree with, by the way, John McMullen. Let's play the clip for our listeners.
I'm thinking the next 2 years or so, he has to find a way to get in the second round or out of the second round of the playoffs. And what Nick Foles was able to do, to take him to a Super Bowl and then possibly take him back to the NFC Championship, proves that, hey, some people can get into that offense and be very successful. He hasn't been healthy. He hasn't really proven to me, besides the year before he got hurt in his first year, really the MVP candidate. He needs to get back to that mode.
All right, that was Donovan McNabb. He was asked about Carson Wentz, and he essentially says, look, he has a lot to prove. He's got 2 more years before I think the Eagles, if he doesn't step it up, they might have to think about moving on, which has now been ripped by Lane Johnson and just about everybody else who is a fan of this generation's Eagles team.
Yeah.
And by the way, McNabb has since tweeted more. I don't know if it has hurt or helped him.
Well, I will say this, and we know this for a long, long time. Anyone who's been around Donovan for any time whatsoever, he's not the best with messaging. And I think that's the problem here. I think if you phrase it, the underlying theme, which is what I tweeted about, is if he's not successful over the next 2 years, there's going to be some issues. I think if you phrased it that way, I think people would understand it better. I think they wouldn't agree. They don't think there is going to be. But if I said to you, we talked about the schedule last week, Mike. I mean, everything is sort of on the tee for this team to make a playoff run this year. Well, let's say they don't make the playoffs. You think people aren't going to be disappointed by that in this division? And then go 2 years down the road and say they don't make the playoffs again? You don't think there's going to be issues with Carson Wentz as the quarterback of this team?
I think he already has the ghost of Foles hanging over him. So if he doesn't perform at the level that he did when he was the MVP of the league, he had a good year this year, and people already thought that he didn't play as well. So if 2 years from now he doesn't get them out of the second round, I think people are going to say they should have never got rid of Foles.
But what does that have to do with McNabb's comments being okay?
He was asked a question.
Well,
I don't care.
He was asked a question. Nobody knows about playing the position in this city more than Donovan McNabb. There's a guy who's made the NFC Championship game 5 times, and he's considered by, I wouldn't say a large portion of the fan base, but certainly a minority as a failure. I mean, think about that.
No, listen, I understand, and that's kind of my point, that I think a lot of his comments are from rooted bitterness to the organization, quite frankly, and the fan base, the Philadelphia media, the entire city of Philadelphia. But if you're a Philadelphia quote-unquote legend or star who's had a lot of on-field success, you would think that your instinct, despite you being in the media, whatever it may be, when you're at that type of level, you don't say that. Like, you don't say it like that. You defend your guys, or you have more of a broad answer. I mean, you're seeing what Lane Johnson's saying.
Hey, I have no problem with people being honest. I have a bigger problem with people saying, okay, I played in Philadelphia for a long time, so I'm not going to say anything negative about anybody, anytime, anywhere, any place. I don't agree with that. It doesn't mean you should be.
Well, I agree with that, too.
For an organization. I will say this about Donovan. He's got a chip on his shoulder. He's had a chip on his shoulder since 1999. This is the 20th anniversary. But it's got nothing to do with the organization. I don't think it has anything to do with Carson Wentz. It has to do with a specific segment of the fan base who doesn't like him, didn't accept him, doesn't respect what he did for the organization. I don't think there's any question he's got a chip on his shoulder when it comes to that small group. To extend it to say it's about the Eagles, I don't agree with that. As far as Lane Johnson, I mean, Lane is Lane. He is going to defend his quarterback, whether it's Nick Foles, whether it's Carson Wentz, whether it was Sam Bradford. I mean, that's just Lane. He's going to do that. So I don't, that doesn't strike me one way or the other. My issue is the underlying theme, which I think is correct, and I think everyone would agree with. If Carson Wentz doesn't produce over the next 2 years, there's going to be some issues. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's going to be good. I think he's going to be really good. But if you just kind of take it out to where I just did, and if this team with these expectations say doesn't make the playoffs or doesn't win a playoff game over the next 2 years, to assume there's not going to be problems with the quarterback, there's going to be significant problems.
And that's all valid. And I don't want to come off saying, if you're a Philly athlete who's had success and you're in the media, you got to lie and everything's, unicorns and rainbows. That's not what I'm saying. But you need to communicate your message.
I mean, yeah, he's not great and I talk about this all the time. People think it's easy to do this. People think it's easy to do what we do,
right,
and get on television, get on the radio, and put together clear, cogent thoughts and get them out really quickly and make your point. It's not as easy as it seems. I think both of you guys would agree with it. At times you make mistakes. Donovan, you could make jokes about the fact that he was a communications major in college at Syracuse. He's never been very good at it. That I'll agree with.
Right.
He's not good at it.
That's kind of my point is, it's unfortunate, and I do feel for him in a sense, because I'm on here for 4 hours a day, and at any point I can say something, and on paper it's not what I meant.
Sure, and Marcus Hayes wrote a piece today at Philly.com, and it's entitled, Donovan McNabb said it the wrong way, but he wasn't wrong. He said a smart thing stupidly. He's essentially saying, look, I played in that town. I know what it's like. If you don't perform, they're going to change their opinion of you pretty quickly. So I'll give him, if he doesn't get this team back to where they want him in 2 years, expect to have a different relationship with the quarterback.
Oh, yeah. No doubt about it. I don't think.
And I don't think he's wrong, by the way. And I think, look, this Foles thing, I think, has changed the perception or the relationship with Wentz as the quarterback for many people out there.
Oh, I was saying with Jimmy Kempsky on Twitter the other day, we were both talking about how so many people have forgotten what Carson Wentz meant to this team in 2017. I mean, there's a segment, and again, it's a very small segment, but you guys have heard it. I see it on Twitter. I get yelled at for not saying Nick Foles is better than Carson Wentz. There's a segment that believes that and forgets where the Eagles were when Carson tore his ACL in Los Angeles in December of that year. It's amazing how quickly they forget. And if you tack 2 years onto that of underachieving, yeah, I mean, the relationship, to say it's going to be strained is to understate it. It's going to be difficult for the Eagles. It's going to be difficult for Carson Wentz. Now, that's projecting the negative. The positive, and I believe it's going to happen, is he's going to play really well, and you're not going to have to worry about things like that. But Donovan is kind of just saying he understands, as a guy, as I mentioned, who made 5 NFC championship games, but what does everyone talk about? He never won the Super Bowl. So all those positives, that was, unless you're really old and you want to go back to the 50s and 1960, certainly in the modern era, even with this group, which has the potential to be better, the greatest run in this entire franchise history was the Andy Reid, Donovan McNabb run. And look at how Donovan is looked at, because he did not reach the pinnacle. And even though, by the way, I argue Carson Wentz already had. He was, if he's not here, the Eagles don't win Super Bowl 52. It's as simple as that. I don't care if people don't understand that. If he's not here, we're talking about a 59 year streak of not winning a world championship in football. So to me, he's already reached that. But if he doesn't play in that game in his career here, he's going to be looked upon the same way. He's not going to be looked upon as the player he is or what he's meant already to this franchise.
You know, you talk about two extremes as far as communicators. I think Carson, I love the guy, great guy on and off the field, but he's pretty PC and very positive towards the media, which is fine, but that's just the route he chooses to go. But behind closed doors, John, how much do you, educated guess-wise, think he could be struggling, or how frustrated you think he could be, and how important is the first few games of this season and the season in general for Carson?
It's very important. When the schedule came out, we talked about how easy it was, how many things are in the positive column for Philadelphia to have a good season, how much talent there is on this team, playing in a bad division where there's only really one other contender, the Dallas Cowboys. There's no reason this team shouldn't make the playoffs. And so when the expectations are that high, and to be honest, if they only make the playoffs as a wild card and lose in the wild card round, people would still be disappointed. So there's tremendous, tremendous expectations, and they only grew because of the runs that Nick Foles had. So that's where this entire Philly voice thing started. I mean, Carson is doubting himself a little bit. There's no question about it. And he's become a little bit, dare I say, Donovan McNabb-ish, because he sees a group of the fan base who doesn't, I don't know what word you want to use, whether it's respect or understand what he did for the team and the franchise. And he's a little resentful for it, but he's also a different personality. And it's not going to come across like Donovan's resentment comes across.
Yeah. You know, now Donovan did take to Twitter to try to explain his quotes. How did you think he did there?
I think he did fine, but again,
for those of you who misread, didn't understand, were confused, or just didn't like my comments, let me clarify for you. Let me start by saying there's no beef, riff, or ill will towards Carson Wentz or the Eagles. My comments were strictly based off experience and understanding of how the business of football works. You are constantly evaluated every day, every game, and if you are reliable and or healthy enough to play, I know at times as players and fans it can be confusing to move on from beloved player, but due to the business of health and trust, tough decisions are usually made. Now, he did say in the interview, which isn't getting a lot of play, he did kind of comment on the health, the availability of Wentz, that he has not been able to make it. Yeah. So that has not really been played up a lot.
So we're the health part of it, and that's legitimate as well. I mean, that to me is the more legitimate part, because if you go back to his senior season in college, he was injured with a broken wrist. And then people kind of forget in his rookie season, he missed most of August, most of the preseason with the broken rib. And then the last 2 years, everybody remembers torn ACL, stress fracture in his back. So we're 4 for 4 as far as injuries go. And you have to be durable to play this position. No question about it. You have to be consistently on the field. So that, to me, is a bigger question mark than performance. I think when Carson Wentz has been healthy or even close to being healthy, arguably wasn't healthy at all last year, he performed at a high enough level to succeed in this league. And he certainly did when he was having his MVP level season. I think people get caught in the minutia of the litmus test. I thought that was silly to say he's got to reach the NFC Championship game. But the underlying premise is correct.
Now, do you think he's saying that he has to reach the NFC Championship game for the fans' admiration or the front office to believe in him as the guy? You know, because Donovan had, I think, first off, you know, we know that he got off on the wrong foot for whatever. They weren't booing him; they were booing the pick. We get that. Now, they draft Kevin Cobb.
He doesn't get that.
Right. He doesn't get that. They draft Kevin Cobb in the second round. And is that his way of saying they drafted somebody and I had been successful and they were all ready to move on from, like, thinking about the next because we had stumbled a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the Kevin Cobb. That's always an issue. I mean, Ben Roethlisberger's had that issue with Pittsburgh. Brett Favre had that issue with Aaron Rodgers. That's kind of a weird NFL thing where you're expected to groom your eventual replacement, and that's not easy from a human nature standpoint. So some of that comes into it. I don't think anybody likes when there's a high draft pick at their particular position because it indicates something, whether it's an heir apparent or whether they're looking to replace you even quicker than that. So I don't think that's unique to Donovan McNabb as far as drafting, again, people at your particular position. The bitterness, though, stems from the booing at the draft, and I think you stated it correctly, Mike. They were booing not the player. They were booing what they were sort of indoctrinated to believe, that the pick should have been Ricky Williams. And I don't think there's any question that the Eagles were proven correct and they drafted the right player, but he's never gotten over it. And that continues. That part of it is true and continues to this day. But I don't think it has anything to do with the organization. The organization believed in him.
John, has there ever been an athlete? You know, these comments got me thinking a little bit. And has there ever been an athlete in Philly that has the equal or better talent as McNabb, who has also been equally or more hated, criticized, underappreciated, however you want to word it? Do you get what I'm trying to ask you?
Yeah, no, I don't think there is. Certainly not in the modern era. I don't know if you can go back further. There were times when people booed Mike Schmidt, but I think for the most part, because of the same reason, because his personality was difficult at times, and he's just not a people person. And arguably, when he retired, he was the greatest third baseman of all time. I think he would be the closest, but I think there was always an underlying respect. I think everybody knew how good he was. They just didn't like him, didn't like his personality. With Donovan, I think it has more to do with not reaching the pinnacle. And the Eagles, it's interesting because if you talk to older people that lived through the horrible years in Philadelphia, I think they respected the Andy Reid, McNabb era a little bit more. People who grew up with it sort of then expected to win. They expected that kind of success. NFC East title, yes. Playoff wins, yes. If we don't get the Super Bowl, it's an ultimate failure. So I think you have different groups, and they come from it at different spectrums. And that's what I was just talking about, the expectations. That's the issue Carson Wentz has now. If the Eagles had a bad team and we're expected to win 5 or 6 games and he wins 9, well, then everything is great. But the expectations change when you're good. And they changed for this Eagles franchise when Andy and Donovan were here. And I think people forget the reason they changed was because of Andy and Donovan for the most part, a lot of other great players. And they just didn't respect what they did. Again, while I say this, it's a minority. I think the majority and the vast majority certainly respected it. But there's certainly a minority that didn't.
And by the way, you just said they don't win the Super Bowl. Here's the text message responding to that is, I think it's the other way around. I don't as the quarterback. Your point is they're not even in position to be there for Nick Foles. I think that's your position. I don't know that. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, that's exactly my position. They're not playing if Carson Wentz.
Right. They're not the number one seed. They're not the number one seed. They don't have the home playoff games.
Exactly. I've always compared it to a starting pitcher. He pitched 7 scoreless innings, and then Nick Foles turned into Mariano Rivera and had a 2-inning save. And he did a phenomenal job, and he deserves all the credit in the world. But if you don't have the starter, the innings eater to get you there, you can't use Mariano Rivera.
Yeah.
And that's always been my comparison.
All right, the Sports Bash Live Thursday, the draft. You can check out John's 7-round Eagles mock at 97.3ESPN.com. We will chew into that a little bit more tomorrow right here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN as we're getting closer to draft day. John had his mock draft 1.0. Now he has his all-Eagles draft. Did he change guys at number 25?
Ooh.
Yeah, check that out right now at 97.3ESPN.com. All right, man, we'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right, guys, and there's context to that, so people should actually read it.
Read. What a novel idea.
Yeah.
All right. At JF McMullen. Boardwalk Hunt.